Hi, this is Dr. Tara Hembrough. I'm from Southeastern Oklahoma State University, and I'm here today with Bob Cox, and he's a retired Army veteran, and he's going to tell us a little bit today about his story. Thanks for being here.
Well, quite welcome. I'm glad to do this.
Thank you.
You want me to just start stream of consciousness here?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
So my association with the military goes back quite a ways, and it started with my birth because I was born to a serving Army officer who happened to be in World War II. And my mother, he met the Southern Belle, and they hooked up, and I was a result of that. And he went off away to Germany to serve in World War II. And so that's how I became associated with the military. And of course, I followed him around the world because he bothered to make it a career. And so I got stationed in all kinds of exotic places and things like that, like Germany. And so, at any rate, so I was brought up in a military environment, so I was very familiar with the military lifestyle and so forth. So, and then I had other people that influenced me quite a bit. And these were, I noticed, talking about your ancestors that might have happened in the military. First of all, I don't know, but I am somehow, in my ancestry, there are people from the American Revolution, and I know that because I had an aunt who was a DAR member, and she of course wanted to let me know that I was related to somebody that served in the Revolution. So I don't know what that was. I don't know, and they didn't obviously have a big influence on my life because I don't even know who they are.
Right.
And then of course another aunt who was a member of the United Daughters of the Confederacy, so I know I have a Civil War connection there, probably on the southern end would be my guess. And so that I had that background, and then I had uncles, of course, who served in World War II. So that's kind of, I was brought up kind of in that arena.
Okay.
And then when I went to college, in fact, I went to Oklahoma State, and part of all those land-grant colleges, you know, required a couple of years that you served. And so I did my couple of years there, and my dad passed on a piece of advice. He said, you know, he had been both an enlisted man and he'd also been an officer.
Okay.
He said, it pays better, you have a lot more responsibility and have a lot more things to transfer if you're an officer. So he suggested that I go ahead and come to the ROTC program. Go through that. He said that's probably the most efficient way to get a commission. And he said you probably like to serve better as an officer.
Okay.
And so I followed that good advice that he gave me there. And so when I came to Oklahoma State, I continued on with the ROTC program after the first 2 years that were mandatory. And in the process, some friends and I on a lark, and because we figured we could make some extra money for parties or whatever we were doing, they suggested we go down and join the Oklahoma National Guard. So I went down here in Stillwater, and I joined the company here in Stillwater, and I spent 2 years with them. At the same time, I was going through ROTC. So I had a couple of years with the Oklahoma National Guard Thunderbirds, and that's a tight association. You know, once you're a Thunderbird, you're always a Thunderbird. So when I graduated, of course, I had an obligation to the military. So what took me into the active duty was the fact that I had an obligation, and I also went into flight training here in school, which transferred and meant that I would become an Army aviator when I got on active duty. So that's kind of the course I followed coming into the military. So and then I was pretty good at what I did, and I liked what I was doing.
And what were you doing? You were doing
Well, I started off, I went all the way back down to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, where my dad had served when we were here in Oklahoma. And so I was an artilleryman, which is the same thing he was, of course. And so we had that legacy together. And then, at any rate, once I finished up with that, I had to serve an obligatory amount of time with the field artillery. And then I had an aviation obligation, so I had to go to flight school. I went to flight school. I got my wings, and then they don't let you do the fun stuff all the time in the military. You probably understand that. So I was a pilot sometimes and an artillery guy sometimes, and I flew a desk, you know, doing operations type things. So
tell me about, you said you were in the Vietnam era.
I was.
Did you deploy then?
I did.
Okay.
I spent two tours in Vietnam. Aviation was a big deal in Vietnam, of course. So I flew as a reconnaissance pilot in Vietnam. The first trip, and most of that was in the daytime, working in the very southernmost part of the country, and working with advisors to the Vietnamese.
Okay.
And then the second, then that was in 1967, 68.
Okay.
And I went back for a second tour in 1970 and 71.
Okay.
And at that time, I was stationed all the way up in the northern part of by the demilitarized zone. That was very different flying conditions.
Okay.
Mountainous, bad weather that would come in and settle in versus a nice flat rice paddy type environment down south.
How did you feel about going to Vietnam? I know the sentiment, it was kind of hard in the United States.
Well, you know, when I signed on, I rode for the brand. That's the way it goes. And so I didn't, probably like a lot of guys my age at that time, we had no anti-war sentiment. We were the targets of anti-war sentiments occasionally, not very much.
Right.
And so, you know, we were committed to what we were doing. And the first time I went there was not nearly so much anti-war sentiment as the second time I went.
Okay.
And it was pretty rampant.
Okay. Was it in Oklahoma? Was it so bad here? I would
It was,
think?
Oklahoma is okay when it comes to vets.
Okay.
Oklahoma is very veteran friendly. And as a matter of fact, I never, during my aviation training in Alabama and other places I was stationed, I never had a problem with anti-war protesters.
Okay.
And on campus, I graduated, I guess, before there was any of that really going on, although the war had started.
Right. Right.
And the only other anti-war sentiment I can tell you about is, of course, when I deployed to Vietnam, I had to go through Oakland, California, and Oakland's not too far away from San Francisco, and San Francisco has a street called Haight-Ashbury where at that time all the hippies hung out. So some of us decided we had to go down there and check out the hippies. We did, and there was no altercations. There was, I'm not even sure it was good-natured banter, but there was banter back and forth, you know, in that regard. But I never experienced in any of my places where somebody would be in my face or spit on me and call me a baby killer and all that. I never personally experienced that.
Right. And so how many years did you serve in the Army?
I was over 27. I had 2 in the National Guard, and I had a little over 25 in the active.
And then why did you decide to retire then?
Well, because my wife said I was going to come back to Oklahoma and serve with the National Guard as an advisor, an active Army advisor.
Okay.
And then we decided they're down in Oklahoma City, and this is all the way in Stillwater, and you want to commute every day, and well, we don't have to do that. And so anyway, we just decided that Stillwater would be it. So we just cut the cord and wound up here in Stillwater.
Right. So how was it having a family and being in the military? Was that hard for your family or for you?
It was much harder. I think it was much harder on my wife.
Okay.
And the kids were an age when I deployed. I had one child when I deployed the first time. I didn't have a second child until after I came back the second time. So, but for a wife, I think it's harder because they're it. But fortunately, my wife she's a Bonita girl, lived in Bonita, and all of her kinfolk were there. So when I deployed overseas, she went home to stay in her mother's house. And her grandfathers were carpenters by trade, Seabees, World War II Seabees.
Okay.
And they built a room onto their mother's house where she and my daughter stayed. And of course, when I came back, we went to my next duty station. So I think overall it was much harder on the ladies because they're now in charge of everything. You know, car breaks down, take care of it. And so I think that and the guys, I was physically busy most of the time, and you know how that goes. So and we didn't have we didn't have Skyping and things of that nature. Once during each tour, I got to make one telephone call, and this was by an uplink to satellites. And back then, that was a big deal, linking up with satellites way up there. And there's something that changes in a conversation between you and your wife. You know, when you have to preface and in sentences like, I love you, over, I love you too, over, you know, and
Right.
something's lost in the dialogue.
Right, that makes sense, that makes sense. How has your military experience influenced the rest of your life, do you think? Your attitudes or your work skills?
Well, when you put that long in, you certainly are influenced. So I say it had a pretty much profound impact on me in shaping my attitudes and some of the things I hold dear, the truths I hold dear. I think.
What are some of the truths you hold dear to you?
Well, I think patriotism is a thing that, you know, a lot of people talk about patriotism.
Yes.
And I think once you have some skin in the game and you're on the line, I think that's a manifestation of the fact that you are committed.
Right, right.
And once you experience that, and now it's in your rearview mirror,
Mm-hmm.
it takes on a different complexion. So I think I've become overall more patriotic, overtly so,
Right.
than I was before. I think as far as the skills, if there are any skills that, you know, I gave thought to being a pilot, commercial pilot after I got out. I said,
Okay.
that those guys are truck drivers, and I didn't
Right.
much want that. So, but at any rate, I think that if I had skills, I'd say they teach you a thought process, a way to process information, package it,
Okay.
and organizational abilities. And I think I've done some of that here. I am now retired, so consequently I have the luxury of coming and going pretty much at my leisure.
Right, right.
And a couple of things I've been involved in. So on the civic side, there are things like we had the Vietnam Wall, traveling wall that came to
Okay,
Stillwater,
I
hosted by Oklahoma State.
Mhm.
And so they asked me if I would organize the manpower to support that.
Oh, okay.
And I did that, and I had a nice time doing it. It was a challenge,
Right.
getting everybody to pull hard toward that. But that's an example
Yes.
of where whatever skills as far as organizing thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Right, right.
I think that helped a lot. And on the fraternal side, I belong to the American Legion.
Yes.
So the American Legion had a project a little over a year ago, it's still ongoing, and they asked me to document all the war memorials, not war memorials, all the veteran memorials in the state of Oklahoma and the county. I was responsible for the county. And that was a challenge, finding them is,
Okay,
you know, when you
sure.
start from scratch, that's the challenge to find all those.
Right.
So I did that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm trying to think of any.
Did you use any Native American? Or
Oh,
is that-
sure, yeah. We did Native Americans for the wall. We went down. I made it a point to go to several of the tribes
Okay.
that are located in Pawnee's got a good presence. The Otos are up in just north of here.
Right.
And my wife is a Cherokee, so
Oh,
that
okay.
makes everything a little bit easier, you know,
Right.
when you can almost speak tribal, but
Right.
not quite. And so those are some examples of the things that we get. Also, since I've retired, I took on a little hobby, and I don't know, I know you know what the World War II Memorial is in
Yes,
Washington.
yes.
World War II,
Mm-hmm.
nice, just grandiose display monument. And they have a registry that goes along with that.
Okay.
And in that registry, you can register veterans of World War II,
Okay.
living, deceased, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And the government only did a certain portion of those. And now, but what I've done is I've registered over 25,000
Oh, my goodness.
World War II vets.
Okay.
Most of which, maybe most, a lot of which are from the state of Oklahoma.
Okay.
So that keeps me busy, just
Right.
trying to go around to.
Why did you think that was important to do?
Well, it started off, a neighbor of mine said, hey, are you a member of the World War II Memorial
Mm-hmm.
membership? You have a, I don't know what that is. What is that? I
Right.
know what a World War II Memorial would be, but I don't know specific about it. Anyway, he acquainted me with it. My wife's kinfolk were all military World War II people. My dad was, my uncles were. So I just started with that, and then one thing led to another, and somebody would ask me, like one of the classes here, class of 1943, and at university, I went to one of their gatherings, and surprisingly, they didn't know much about it either. So I wound up putting 300 and some odd of their classmates in there. So one thing led to another. I walk into a car wash in South Carolina. While my car is getting scrubbed up, I see a guy with a veteran's hat on. So I
Okay.
start a dialogue with him. So you can meet people
Right.
virtually anywhere you go. Veterans are everywhere, they're ubiquitous.
Right.
But
Right.
you know, trying to trying to get to them, talk to them, and have them open up to you.
Mhm.
And some are very, as you can imagine, I'm sure you probably run across people that are very emotional, who had some
Yes.
intense trauma,
Mhm.
and they're sort of reticent to talk about it.
Mhm. And why did you choose the Army to go into?
Well, that's what my father was.
Okay, that's
and,
right.
And yeah,
Mhm,
and so
okay.
consequently, you know, like, you couldn't buck the system too much. So, and on top, yeah, I knew a lot about the Army because of it.
So did any of your kids join the
No,
military?
no. As a matter of
Okay.
fact, I had two girls,
Okay.
and
Mhm.
that were quite well without the military service
Mhm.
behind them. So one's a school teacher, and the other one is a lawyer. So,
Okay,
so they're both
Right.
serving in a different capacity.
right, right. Are there any stereotypes you see in today's culture about veterans that you want to say, that's not how it really is, or
Oh,
something you
there's-
want to address? This is something I ask everybody.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'd say what I think veterans are, and you get different opinions, of course, about all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think veterans are really, they are they're kind of like our first and last line of defense
Yes.
for the democracy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they don't get their just dues, and in
Mhm.
most places, Oklahoma is a big exception to that, because
Okay.
we are so good about
Mhm.
taking care of our veterans here.
Mhm.
But that's not true every place you go.
Right.
And most of the places I see where it's not is on the news or something like that. It's teleported into me. So,
Okay.
but anyway, I think they are by and large very dedicated individuals.
Mhm.
They've got skin in the game, believe me. They
Yes.
have courage to join up. They absolutely walk the walk as well as talking the talk.
Mhm.
You know, it's easier to talk, but
Mhm.
they're actually there.
Right,
And a lot of these guys, some of the people in ROTC here that I associate with a lot,
Mhm.
they are also members of the National Guard, and they've been
Mhm.
deployed. We've got a couple of cadets that have been through 2 tours in Afghanistan, for example.
Okay.
So
Mhm.
that kind of brings home to you that they're
Right.
paying the young veterans today that are in the military, they're paying the price for the rest of us. You know,
Yes.
we get to go shopping in the mall for Christmas, and they're sitting in some outpost in Afghanistan. There's a big difference there. So I think they're a very good hope for us as far as the future, because I think they're disciplined. I think they have committed themselves. They have if not a love of country, they understand what patriotism is,
Yes.
and they know the value of the democracy and all those kinds of things.
Mhm.
So I think that's what I think in the main about veterans. They're a treasured resource, and compared to their peer group,
Right.
they are very unique,
Okay.
because a lot of people don't know a lot about the United States, all this current furor that's going around about socialism, democracy, and all those
Okay.
kinds of things. I of course have my own opinions about that, but I think those are the people more likely to make sure that the democracy, if that's what we decide to do, continues on for the good of all the populations.
Right. So here's a question I ask everybody, and this is something we talk about a lot. It was to student veterans in Durant. There are the 22 veteran suicides a day, that statistic. Is there anything you think could be done, or anything, there are lots of things trying to be done
Sure.
to help that, or to, what do you think's going on with that?
Well, I think it's a huge problem, and it's a function of stresses,
Okay.
repeated stresses, trauma. All of those things contribute to that. And to get to a position where you have no other recourse,
Right.
that's a bit foreign in my thinking, but
Right.
it's a reality, and you have to do something to address it. And I think there are a lot of agencies trying to do that, but I think the problem, and I think quite frankly, I think at the federal level, they have to try to build something that is applicable to all, acceptable to all, and all
Right.
those kinds of things. So I think they're doing a pretty good job of that, and more recently they're doing better because of the attention that they've gotten. I think the state's doing a pretty good job. Oklahoma in particular is doing a pretty good job with suicide prevention and awareness. And to me, one of the big problems is you have to identify your target population.
Right.
I mean,
Yes.
you walk in, How do you identify a person, and not just with suicides, I'm talking about veterans in general.
Yes.
How do you identify a veteran? Well, you kind of look around a little bit, and I can go to Walmart in the space of 15, 20 minutes of shopping, I can find you 10 veterans. They're all over the place. And then, so I think the first thing, you gotta locate them, you gotta find them.
Okay.
Once you find the veterans, then you can strike up a conversation, you engage with them.
Right.
And sometimes they're very open and they're amenable to chit chat, and other times they're not so much, but you can tell that, and you know when to
Right.
walk away
Right.
and give them space. And so those are a couple things. You have to find them and engage with them, and then you can work up in your own mind, how is it that I could best help that individual?
Okay.
Or, and it's not only the veteran, it's family members as well, because they need a support system behind them. So I think if you identify them and you engage with them and you decide what I can do to help. If you can't help them, then maybe you happen to know some organization that could help them, and maybe help them find somebody that can help them. And then you got to follow up a little bit on that, because one-time fixes don't work.
Right.
You know how that goes. So you have to be a little persistent without being pushy and all the rest of that to turn them on. So, and then if you're really into that and you can find enough people, you can start a network and organize,
right.
and that way one person turns into 10 people, and you can reach that many more people. So that'd be my thought about how you can address suicide or veterans. And once those people are deployed, the National Guard has a not quite as easy a time as the active force, because the active force has a support system right on the forts that can try to help. But the National Guard people, you belong to the Stillwater unit, but you live in Yale or you live somewhere else, and so how are they? You know, it's almost too hard. But if you can focus on the local aspects and individual aspects, if you can get them one-on-one, and there are plenty of programs. We've got in the Legion, we've got a couple that has therapy horses.
Oh, okay.
And Veneta has a big deal where they have a big ranch up there, and they bring in veterans that can shoot, target shoot, they can shoot bows and arrows, they can hunt, they can fish, and they do that for a weekend. So all of those are mechanisms, and you have to find them first. You find them and see how you can best help them.
Do you think it's been easier, do you think it's been harder for Vietnam veterans coming back after Vietnam than today? I mean, it would be hard to know.
Well, I have an opinion about that.
Okay.
And in fact, I gave a talk to a group of Vietnam veterans here at the university a couple of years ago. And because the university is very good about that, hosting veterans, and in particular Vietnam veterans.
Okay.
And it was coming up on the 50th anniversary and things of that nature.
Okay, right.
And one of the points I keep helping, I never was welcomed home. That's what you always hear. Oh, not always. That's what you hear most commonly from Vietnam veterans.
Right.
You know, I never had a welcome home.
Okay.
I came home, no parades, no fanfare, people spitting on me at the airport, you know, all of those negatives. And that certainly happened.
Yes.
Never happened to me, thank goodness. And so what I told them, I said, you know, I keep hearing that. And I'm certain that it happened to someone here. And we all have common experiences. They're not the same experiences, but common experiences. And so I have a couple things to say about it. The first thing I'd say about it is that I don't know what your expectation was. I didn't expect a parade. I didn't expect anything. And I said, and I never was confronted. That made it easier, obviously, on me than other folks. So I said, what I believe that is a good piece of therapy for all of us that have these angst about coming home to no fanfare and we weren't appreciated and the rest of that. So you have to dampen your expectations as to what you really expected from that.
Right.
And the second thing that you can do is you got to get out there and tell your story. This is a good example. What you're doing is wonderful, because obviously you'll start hearing stories, and those stories hopefully will spread.
Yes.
And I said, my dad never told me about World War II.
Oh, okay.
See?
Okay.
Most of my uncles never did discuss that either. That was something that they put behind them.
Okay.
And I said, but I think we're unique, because I do think, by and large, I do think that the Vietnam era veterans were there was such a lack of respect
Okay.
on the part, and they were just doing their duty by and large. I mean,
Yes.
they didn't decide to go there just
Right.
because they wanted to shoot somebody.
Right.
So the idea behind those guys, hey, you know, tell your story, tell it to your family, tell it to your friends and the rest of it. And there'll be commonalities. You don't have to tell them all the details
Right.
of the things, but you can find humor in virtually anything. So
Mhm.
if nothing else, you tell them a little humorous anecdote that happened to you,
Right.
etc. So
Mhm.
that'd be what I'd say. I told them that my experience was I had the most wonderful homecoming ever. I landed at the airport in Tulsa.
Mhm.
My fiance met me with her family, soon to be my family, met me at the airport. We had a wonderful time. And 8 days after I landed, we got married. So I had probably as good a homecoming as a fellow could have ever
Right,
anticipated there.
right.
So that's what I say to those guys.
Mhm. Excellent, excellent. Anything else you want to share about your story? How come you're hanging out with all these veterans still at that many years later? How come it's so part of your identity still, do you
Yeah,
think?
well, it's within my capability. That's always
Okay.
a good thing to have when you
Mhm.
can contribute in some
Right,
way.
right.
And I'm fairly skilled at writing, and I'm fairly skilled at in history, military history in
okay.
particular.
Okay.
And I very much appreciate the fact that all those guys, our predecessors, the World War II generation in particular,
Right.
there's a fairly good reason we're not talking German or Japanese nowadays, and they were a good part of that reason.
Right.
So I just feel a kinship. You know, it's kind of like
Yeah,
brothers in arms, although we never knew. I'll tell you a quick anecdote if we could.
sure, sure.
I'm working now on a project we have a memorial for one of my classmates who was killed in Vietnam.
Okay.
And we give that each year to one of the deserving ROTC cadets.
Mhm.
And in the course of all this, it's sort of emotional, but at any rate, he was killed up in the northern part of Vietnam in a very bad place called Khe Sanh.
Okay.
Khe Sanh is a very well-known battle.
Yeah. Okay.
And these guys were stuck out there at the end of the lifeline, and when bad weather set in, you couldn't resupply, you couldn't move people in. At any rate, they were trapped, and the Marines were there. Well, my friend was part of the relief force that went in there, and he lost his life during that. So I'm sitting at coffee one morning with the good old boys, and one of our Marines named Don, he was talking, this is around Veterans Day, and we were chit-chatting about it. And I said, Don said, you were at Khe Sanh, weren't you? Yeah. So when were you there? Oh, you're early 68. Early 68. Well, that's when my friend was killed. And I said, yeah. I said, you know, this is kind of a kismet moment here. What we have here is my friend died trying to get the bad guys off your back.
Yes.
And so I've advocated for this, my friend, to become part of the Oklahoma Military Hall of Fame.
Mhm.
And so I said, how about you writing a letter that tells about your experiences? And he said, I didn't know the guy. I said, well, of course you didn't know the guy.
Right.
He was one of 15,000 other ones that were out
Right.
there.
Mhm.
So what he did, he wrote it up really well, I thought. He said, although I never met him, I didn't know him at all.
Right.
How did he put that? He said, he had a profound effect on my life.
Mhm. Mhm.
And because of that, he was talking about basically maybe one of the reasons he survived was because of the action not only of my friend that was killed,
Yes.
but I thought the idea that he would come up with the
Right.
notion of I didn't know him, never met him,
Yes.
didn't know him. However, he did a solid by me.
Right. Oh, that's good. I like that
That's just a
story.
little anecdote for
Yes. Yes.
bring it all in perspective.
Mhm. Thank you so much for sharing.
Sure,
Is there anything
yeah.
else?
I'm at your leisure at the moment.
Nice to meet you, Bob.
It was nice meeting you
Thank
too.
you.
Yeah, and
Thank you
good
for
luck
your
on all your,
service.
yeah.
Thank you.
Good luck for that. And here, I'd like to give you a small token of my
Oh,
esteem. This
okay.
is,
Thank
you
you.
asked me some
Okay.
questions,
Oh,
and these are the
nice.
ones that I don't
Okay.
normally
Oh, okay.
get some of these, but
Okay.
anyway, That'll tell
Okay,
you
is that okay if I keep
Of
it?
course, yeah.
Okay, thank you, okay, that'll be
It's on
great.
my computer.
Perfect, okay,
It's there forever.
thank you.